us awake. But it's good to be here this evening, and welcome for some of us. It might be our first time at Myton Church coming along here. If that's you, particularly warm welcome this evening. Well, this is the first of a number of evenings we're going to have on big questions that we might have about the Christian faith. And all of us, I'm sure, will have questions, big questions maybe, whether we're Christians and we're sort of grappling and working things out, whether we're not a Christian, but we're kind of looking in and working out some of these questions maybe for the first time. It might be that we've got questions about suffering. You know, why is it that there's a God who allows such suffering, maybe in our lives or in the world? Maybe our questions are in that area. Maybe you ask, isn't loads of evil done in the name of religion? And you know, how does that work? What's going on there? Questions about that. Maybe others, questions about science. Maybe at school you're being told one thing and then at church something else, and you go, are these compatible? Science and religion together. And so we think as a church it's really good to ask questions. This should be the kind of church where we can ask our questions that we have. And we also believe that there's good answers to those questions that are found in the Bible. And tonight, this is the first of the evenings we've got. And we're going to be thinking about the topic, is the Bible still credible today? As a book, is it credible today? And so what we're going to do, just as we start, is watch a little video that I'll try and... that's getting out here. See if I can find it. Here we go, a little video, just 5 minutes long, that introduces some of the things we'll be thinking about tonight.
The Bible is the most influential book ever. It has impacted the world all around us more than we've ever imagined. For example, the language we speak on a daily basis. So many common words and phrases originate from the English Bible. Words like sex, beautiful, and busybody, and phrases like by the skin of your teeth, eat, drink, and be merry. Many of us get our names from Bible characters. You might know a Joshua, an Andrew, David, Mary, Ruth, or Elizabeth, all Bible names. The Bible has shaped our calendars and our seasons too. We're in the 21st century. That's 21 centuries since Jesus Christ. And our favourite seasons and holidays, like Christmas and Easter, they're all based on events in the Bible.
And if you like music, the Bible's inspired West End musicals like Joseph and his Technicolor Dreamcoat, and song lyrics by famous artists, U2, Bob Dylan, Katy Perry, Mumford & Sons, even the Spice Girls. Two Become One was in the Bible long before they sang it. And if you like sports, in stadiums all over the world, we hear songs and chants inspired by the Bible. Personally, I love rugby, and Welsh fans sing Bread of Heaven. The England team are cheered on by Swing Low Sweet Chariot. They're both songs inspired by Bible stories.
If you like movies, Hollywood still spends millions on epic films based on the Bible. From Mel Gibson's Passion of the Christ to the DreamWorks animation The Prince of Egypt. And the Bible was the basis for much of Tolkien's Lord of the Rings and C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. If you like reading, William Shakespeare's plays contain an estimated 1,300 quotations or allusions from the Bible. The Dictionary of Cultural Literacy even claims that no one in the English-speaking world can be considered literate without a basic knowledge of the Bible.
And if you want to see society transformed, the Bible has inspired more positive change than anything else. From nurses like Florence Nightingale to the founding of hospitals and the whole hospice movement. The Bible inspired the abolitionist movement. People like William Wilberforce, who helped to overturn slavery in the British Empire. Oh, and Wilberforce also founded the RSPCA because of his biblical commitment to animal welfare. You know, whole nations, governments and laws have been founded on principles in the Bible. In the House of Parliament, inscribed in the very floor of the lobby, is a verse from the Bible. Unless the Lord builds the house, the builders labour in vain.
I love reading and I love books. Sometimes I read on my Kindle, but I still love to have a hard copy in my hands too. Here are a few global bestsellers that you may be familiar with. Perhaps you've read these.
best-selling book of the last 5 years.
The Bible.
Yeah.
The best-selling book. Well, it won't be the Bible anymore, I can tell you that.
So many books on the bestseller list. I can't tell.
Oh, I don't know, deliciously Ella.
Something like Lord of the Rings? Hobbit?
I'd say it's definitely Gone Girl, personally. I think, yeah. I think anyone who's seen the original film, I think Gone Girl's had the biggest. I mean, we've got the Oscars and everything as well, the award there. But yeah, definitely Gone Girl.
50 Shades of Grey?
I would guess probably like Harry Potter or something like that.
50 Shades of Grey.
But it may surprise you to realise that the Bible is still the world's best-selling book every single time.
Really? No, okay, yeah, that surprises me. That surprises me. I don't know. I think people kind of stick their nose up at religion.
Oh, really?
Is it really?
No.
Really?
Wow.
No.
I wouldn't have thought it's the sort of thing that people would go out and buy and still read, really, I guess. Last year, more copies of the Bible were bought and sold than all these others put together.
So the Bible is the most influential book ever. But is it more even than that?
There we go. You can watch the rest of it later if you want on YouTube. It's quite interesting to watch along. But just, that's some introduction, some interesting things. That girl, very passionate about Gone Girl, quite disappointed. She looked quite emotional that wasn't true there. Just with the person next to you, or just kind of if you're in a group with people, did anything maybe surprise you? Just chat amongst yourselves for a minute or so. Anything particularly surprise you in that video that maybe you didn't know before? Yeah, just have a chat for 1 or 2 minutes, and then we'll come back together. Maybe a few things that we hadn't thought about before when it comes to this book, the Bible. But we're going to be thinking about this question: is the Bible still credible today? Picking up on some of the things in those videos and a few other things. In the last 50 years alone, 3,900 million copies have been sold. In court, countless numbers each year swear by it. Thousands of hotels have it by the bedside, don't they, still? And in the box office, as we saw, millions are taken each year. Maybe billions have been taken from the storylines of stories in the Bible. At least parts of it have been translated into 3,589 different languages. And we use more than 100 of its phrases in everyday conversation. So of course this book that I'm talking about, the Bible, which Christians claim to be the very words of God. I don't know if any of the teenagers here, or when you were younger, you used to read the Guinness World Records. Is that still a thing that you would get that as a Christmas present? I used to absolutely love that. This big old book, and you sort of memorise the different facts and amazing thing of how long people's nails grow or that. You know, just really, I'm glad I'm not alone in that. But the Guinness World Records, they estimate that 5 billion copies of the Bible have been sold. Lord of the Rings, 155 million. Harry Potter, the Philosopher's Stone, 125 million. The Bible, 5 billion copies of it have been sold. That's the estimate according to the Guinness World Book of Records. We need to think about, what does that actually mean? Who cares? Well, at the very least, we need to have an informed opinion about this book, to have examined and figured out what we make of the most popular book in the whole of human history. And I don't doubt that in a room like this, a number of different views perhaps we have about the Bible. But just for the next few minutes, I'd love to tackle 2 objections that are often raised when it comes to the credibility of the Bible. The first objection is you can't be sure, and that's a sort of, what about its credibility historically? But the second, you can't be serious, and that's more of a kind of, is it credible morally? Is it livable for our lives today? So that's kind of where we're going. Two things to look at, if you want the fancy terms. One of them's a modernist argument, the other postmodernist. If you don't care about that, leave that, that's fine. Here we go, the first one then. Objection number 1, you can't be sure. And many people, including one of my friends, Grant, he would have issues over the historical credibility of the Bible. He'd say that this book, it's no more than just a myth, a sort of fairy tale of events that maybe at one time contained a kernel of truth, but since then it's just, well, it's been handed down and changed, and what we have here is so radically different than what happened back then, all those years ago. Grant would say to me, look, put the Bible in the myth box and close the lid. Kind of end of discussion. Actually, a few years ago, the prominent atheist and Oxford professor Richard Dawkins, he would sum up Grant's views, maybe a little bit more eloquently, when he said this, that the Bible's a chaotically cobbled together anthology of disjointed documents, composed, revised, translated, distorted, and improved by hundreds of anonymous authors, editors, and copyists. Do you see what Richard Dawkins is saying? That the Bible, it should be found in the fiction section of a bookshop, not on the non-fiction shelves. It should be over with Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, rather than seen as being true. Of course, we need to ask, is he right with that? That the Bible's been revised and translated and improved? Because actually none of us want to be gullible, do we? I don't want to be, I'm sure you don't want to be as well, when we come to this topic. So what is it that we have in front of us? Can it be trusted? Is it true? Or should we put it in that myth box and close the lid? Well, often one of the arguments that someone like Richard Dawkins uses, the arguments that he makes, is along the lines of the game Chinese Whispers. I don't know if, I think it was a kid's birthday party this afternoon at church. It's the kind of game you play at that, isn't it? You know, everyone sit down in a circle, and then someone in the circle starts with kind of blah, 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 I love chocolate. And you whisper it along, and you go around, and then someone at the end goes, blah, 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 Zoe ate all the chocolate, and what's happened is it's gone around the circle is that was changed. The meaning, the essence. Maybe someone's changed that deliberately. I think I was that kid that sort of thought it'd be funny to change the whisper as it went along. But maybe it's just happened by mistake. And what we have at the end is so very different than what we have at the beginning. And it's commonly said, oh, that's what's happened with the Bible. Maybe it started off true, but it's just been translated time and time again. It's been fabricated that what we have in front of us now is just so different. And that sounds quite possible, doesn't it? That something like that might have happened. Yet the reality could not be more different. It's not like this Bible was translated from the previous 1984 one, and then that from the 1960 or 1920, and kind of going back all the way to the year dot. That would obviously allow for a Chinese Whispers type thing to happen. Now, instead, a standard Bible like this that I have in my hands has been translated from the earliest Hebrew and Greek manuscripts that we have available. The Chinese Whispers argument, it sounds quite plausible, but it just doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Think about it, all someone like Richard Dawkins would need to do is to find an early manuscript in a museum that he can, and show how it's been fabricated to back up his points. But he can't, and so he hasn't. And so then we naturally ask, don't we, well, what are these manuscripts that the translators and scholars go back to? In fact, when it comes to any ancient text, well, two basic questions should be asked. One, how many manuscripts do we have? And two, what's the time distance between the manuscripts that we have to when they were actually written? Well, how many early copies of the New Testament of the Bible, for example, do we have? Is it one that we're getting this from, or is it two, three? Well, I find this really exciting from a historical point of view as a Christian, because there are over 5,000 handwritten Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. You can add to that 10,000 Latin manuscripts, 9,000 early portions of the New Testament. And you can see there, if you can, your eyesight's good, that we have around 24,000 copies or portions of the New Testament. And perhaps that doesn't sound very exciting as you hear that, or impressive even, but compare that to any other writing from ancient history, and it blows it out of the water. So Caesar, at the bottom there, his Gallic Wars. If you went to a posh school, that's the kind of thing maybe that you studied. I didn't go to one, so I don't know. But Caesar's Gallic Wars, how many ancient copies do we have of that? Well, just 10. That's how we know what we know about Caesar. New Testament, over 5,000 Greek manuscript portions alone. But what about Aristotle? He's famous, isn't he? A philosopher. Aristotle, he gets quoted every now and then. Well, his work, Poetics, again, look at the numbers there. 49 of Aristotle's works compared to what we see there in the New Testament. Okay, you might say, but wait a minute, there's no originals, are there, of the New Testament? I got you cornered, Nathan. There are no originals, are there? And that's right. The earliest fragment we can get our hands on is probably this one, actually, that's found in Manchester. It's roughly, scholars debate it slightly, but it's around the year AD 125 in the 2nd century. And you can see that. You should go and look. It's part of John 18. I'm sure we all knew that. John chapter 18 in the New Testament. You can look at that. You go up on the train to Manchester. But actually, we need to know that we don't have any originals from that period of history, of any kind of ancient works. But compare it again to Caesar and the Gallic Wars. The first copy we have, you can see that is 1,000 years after the original. It's quite a long time. Or Aristotle, his Poetics, 1,400 years after it was written to the first copy that we can get. New Testament, 25 years. Some would say 30, 35, but you get the idea. Seriously narrow amount of time. And that amount of evidence is unparalleled in this period of history. Again, you might think, okay, great. Well, can you see the importance though in that? What was written was all in the public arena from a really early point. If it wasn't reliable, what was written down in the Bible, it just would never have got off the ground. People would have just dismissed it, but they didn't. And it took root as reliable accounts then of the life of Jesus Christ. Just to put it a bit further, if what we have in front of us here is an airbrushed account, and if the authors were trying to make up a history from which to launch a global movement, surely they would have airbrushed bits out. Wouldn't we, if we started out? Wouldn't we airbrush out the embarrassing criminal's death of the leader of the movement, Jesus? Or maybe the embarrassing failings of the disciples who were at the forefront. Wouldn't we have just changed those details slightly? But it's not great PR, is it? Yet the Bible never claims to be fairy tale or legend or myth. The gospel writers and the New Testament writers after them want to provide true, reliable history for us. I don't know if you've could have read lots of the Bible or just bits or haven't looked at it maybe much at all. But when you look through the gospel accounts of Jesus' life, you'll see that they are filled with names and dates and places. The Bible is rooted in real history. It's anything but cobbled together, like that quote says. So just look at one example. You see here in Luke's Gospel, chapter 3, try my best with the names. In the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip tetrarch of Iturea, and Trachonitis and Lysanias tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the wilderness. Now that's a little bit like in 30 years from now, someone saying, in the first year of Rishi Sunak's reign, when King Charles was on the throne, Sir Keir Starmer was the leader of the opposition, Justin Welby was the Archbishop of Canterbury, Miley Cyrus was top of the charts. Yes, I did have to look that up this afternoon. It's that kind of detail. It's not myth, it's fairy tale. This is rooted in real history. And that leads Sir Frederick Kenyon, famous quote here, the former director, principal librarian of the British Museum, It led him to say this: there can be no doubt the Gospels as we have them are the same as the originals. Both the authenticity and general integrity of the books may be regarded as finally established. What about the second thing, mate? The second objection, that's this: you can't be serious. See, I guess for some of us, we might think, okay, great about the history stuff, pretty charts, good stuff, Nathan. I enjoyed looking along with that. But that's not my problem. My issue is that I don't really like what the Bible says. And I get in our culture at the moment, some of the things that the Bible says can seem pretty unpalatable. I get that. But with a number of objections that are thrown at the Bible culturally, we sometimes just need to slow down and read what the Bible actually is saying. Take the question of slavery, for example. So not that long ago, someone said to me, Nathan, I can't take the Bible seriously because it advocates slavery. In the New Testament, they said one verse says, slaves, obey your masters. And it's a terrible book. I don't want anything to do with a God who says that. That's what they said to me. But actually, when you look at the Bible, you come to realise that it doesn't necessarily say what many people presume. When the Bible talks about slavery, in the New Testament sense, it actually talks about service. A temporary thing that people used to clear their debts, and they were usually free by their 30s. It's actually much closer to a sort of modern employment contract. There's examples in history of slaves whose contract had finished, but it was good for them, so they stayed beyond that. It's absolutely nothing like the 18th century West African slave trade that our minds might go to as we hear that. The slave trade and human trafficking would be something that contends totally by the New Testament. And actually, as we hinted just in that video, it was Christians reading their Bibles and realising that it was wrong that led them to campaign in government to end the slave trade. So it's quite bizarre to say that I'm going to reject the Bible because it advocates slavery, because it just doesn't in that way. But perhaps with us it's slavery, but there's other issues that we have with this book. I find sometimes in those moments a helpful question to ask is this. The Bible claims to be God's word, so what do I expect to find when I encounter God? Let me put it like this, excuse the irreverence slightly on this, but imagine that you could sit down in Starbucks, okay, just over in the Shires there. If you could sit down in Starbucks with God, and you ordered a skinny latte or whatever you wanted, and you sat down with God, and you could chat about anything there. You could discuss all sorts of things about life and morality, and you chatted for hours perhaps together until you were kicked out at closing time. But as you chat, you could see with God whether your views would collide or whether you would agree with each other as you talked about various things. Here's the question. Would you honestly expect to find absolutely everything that you talk about, what you think is good and not good, to match precisely what the God of the universe says? I don't know about you, but I'm not sure that I get everything right all of the time on every issue. I've got a wife who sometimes reminds me of that as well, although she's very gracious. But look, if God is real, do you expect that on everything we would match his views, what we think in culture today? Is it not possible that there might be some things where I'll be mistaken and God would be right? And let's be realistic as well. Every different generation and different culture objects to the Bible on different points at different times. So we need to ask, what culture gets it right? Is it ours or is it another one? I don't know if you've ever looked back at, depends what kind of age you are here, but if you've got photos of you 30 or 40 years ago, you ever look back at those photos? Or maybe you guys have looked back to your parents, photos they've shown you maybe of their 30, 40 years ago or something. And you're in shock or maybe in hysterics as you look at what exactly it is that they're wearing in those photos. Some people are standing by what they wore. And no, it was really good, and I'm still wearing it today. But at that time, your parents, or maybe you as well here, might have thought that they were wearing the most fashionable trainers or jumpers or whatever it was. But 30 years on, there's some big questions to be asked about the fashion choices that what they were allowed to wear. But at the time, of course, it was normal, it was right, it was what everyone was doing. See, there's no perfect culture or perfect time in history. I've just, this isn't really me showing off, I hope, but just started trying to read a book by Dostoevsky, The Brothers Karamazov. it's a bit beyond me if I'm honest, but I'm trying really hard to read something older than the last few years. And it definitely helps me to get to sleep as I try and read it in the evening. But writing about 150 years ago, it's really interesting to see the kind of cultural differences between what we do now and think is normal and what was going on at the time. And so 150 years ago when he's writing, dueling with guns, well, that was seen as perfectly normal if you had an argument with someone. Yeah, let's have a duel, pistons at dusk or whatever it is. Now, if you pulled a gun out in the Westbury area or after this, the police would, I'm sure, come and do something about it. But in the time he was writing in the 19th century, lying in public, well, that was seen as completely unacceptable. Nowadays, lying, it's a bit more mainstream, isn't it? Politicians, yeah, they do it, we can do it fine. Which culture's got it right? His or ours? Can we say that in 2023 we've got everything totally sorted and they got it all wrong? That's quite naive. Well, as we come towards the end, it's worth asking the question, isn't it? Why should we care about all of this? What difference does it make? I think this is helpful. One writer, Australian guy, John Dixon, he put it like this. If all we were talking about were some songs that a man called Jesus had written 2,000 years ago, no one for a moment would dispute that Jesus lived and wrote better songs than Elvis Presley. And this is the key. It is, of course, that Jesus in the Bible makes demands of us that we stumble. Often it's because we don't want to change that we say, I'm not sure we have what actually happened historically. Please don't do that when it comes to the Bible. See for yourself whether you think this book really is credible, trustworthy, true, reliable. And see what you think of this book's main character as well. For me personally, and for many I know in this room at Myton Church, as we read and engage with the Bible, we're constantly mesmerised by its central character, Jesus Christ. A man who came into this world in really humble circumstances. A man who loved people, who cared for people, he lived a perfect life in every single way at every moment. And he would ultimately, willingly, go to a cross to die, not just for people that he liked, but even for his enemies, even for people like you and me, so that we might be forgiven. And as you encounter this Jesus, you meet someone in the pages of the Bible who countless millions of Christians across the world call their friend, their hope, and their saviour. That is what is at stake when it comes to this book. So I hope you've enjoyed just thinking maybe a little bit more about some of these things, hearing some of those objections that we've looked at. And kind of really encourage you just to do what I've said. Take a look at one of the accounts of Jesus' life. There's in John's Gospels just by the door. Do feel free to take one of those away if you would like to encounter Jesus and see what you make of him for yourself. But also you can come along on a Sunday morning, any Sunday morning at 10:30, where we're looking at that Gospel of John and thinking what it says to us today as well. That. And also next week, Alan, who's here as well, is going to be giving a talk that maybe fits in actually to some of the things that we've been talking about tonight, looking particularly at archaeology. Does that undermine, if they dig something up, does that undermine the Bible or does it confirm the Bible? And he's going to be taking us through. I'm really looking forward to that. So same time next Sunday evening. Thanks so much for coming. Don't rush off, and see you soon.